Brilliant. Thanks. We're now live, colleagues. So good afternoon. Welcome to Development Plan Panel. I'm Councillor Walsh, I chair the panel. I've got my usual preamble to go through, folks, so if you don't mind, so that we're extremely legal. So I'd like to start the meeting today by confirming that this meeting of Development Plan Panel meets the requirements of the Council's constitution, even though members of the panel are in remote attendance. While items today will be fully discussed as usual, remote attendance requires a few slight changes to how I manage the debate. Therefore, can all attendees mute their microphones unless they invite them to speak? This will avoid disruption from background noise and feedback and the like. Can all participants please keep their cameras on during the meeting? The exception to that, I guess, really is officers who are not participating if there's any concerns about their connection stability, because we'd like to keep the meeting progressing in as sensible manner as possible. All participants will be invited to introduce themselves at the start of the public session to make it clear to observers who will be involved in proceedings. Members wishing to ask questions, make comments, you do so by using the raised hand facility. I ask your assistance and patience while I go through this process and while I read the script. So, I've mentioned internet connectivity. Mine has been good of late, but as a safeguard, we elect a deputy chair who'd step in during my absence. So I move that Councillor Ritchie be that person, and I invite another member to second that. Members, thank you very much, Councillor McKenna. And thank you, Councillor Ritchie, for volunteering to do that. Right, so now I'm going to invite members to introduce themselves and to mute their microphone once you've introduced yourself. I'll start with, we're going to go through in alphabetical order. So Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlan Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Salma Arif has given her apologies. Councillor Campbell.
Councillor Colin Campbell, good afternoon.
Councillor Andrew Carter.
Councillor Andrew Carter, Carvely and Farsley Ward, Leader of the Conservative Opposition.
Thank you very much. Councillor Collins, has Councillor Collins joined us yet? Or not, but I'm sure she can introduce herself when she joins us. Councillor Finnegan also, I think, is a late comer. Am I wrong in that? No, he's still not joined us. Okay, fair enough. Councillor Caroline Gruen.
Hello, everyone. Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Jim McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Jim McKenna, Army Ward Councillor.
Lovely, thank you. Councillor Lisa Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lisa Mulheron, Executive Member for Climate Change, Transport and Sustainable Development.
Thank you very much. And lastly, in the elected members, Councillor Kevin Ritchie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Kevin Ritchie, Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Lovely, thank you. So moving to officers, Jonathan Carr.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Martin Elliott.
Hello, Chair, everybody. Martin Elliott, Head of Strategic Planning.
David Feeney.
Good afternoon, everybody. David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Adam Harvard.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adam Harvat, Group Manager for Policy and Plans.
Nicole Walker.
Afternoon, Nicole Walker, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Excellent, thanks very much. And Tasha.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Natasha Prosser, Governance Services.
Wonderful, thanks so much, folks. Right, let's move on to agenda item 1. Tash?
Thank you. So there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item number 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Under agenda item number 3, there are no formal late items. Under agenda item number 4, could I ask members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests? I'll take silence as none.
Okay.
Thank you. Under agenda item number 5, I've received apologies from Councillor Arif and notification that Councillor Collins is running a little bit late today.
Thank you very much. Now, do we have any minutes to approve? Tash?
Yes, we do. So if you go to page 5, we have minutes from Tuesday, the 8th of September 2020, and then we've also got a second set from the additional meeting held Tuesday, the 13th of October.
Lovely, thank you. So, turning to the 8th of September minutes, I don't propose to go through them page by page, colleagues. You'll be pleased to know I'm very aware you'll have all read them. Has anyone got any items to raise on the 8th of September minutes? I see no indications. Oh, no matters arising either. Let's take those two together. No? Okay, is somebody prepared to move the minutes as a true record? Come on, elected members, somebody needs to show their hand. Thank you, Councillor Ritchie. And right, turning to the 13th of October, are there any points of order or matters arising from those minutes from our additional meeting? Nope. Okay, good. Can I have someone, elected member, move those minutes, please? Thank you, Councillor Moherrin. Much appreciated. Right, so let's move on to item 6, which is our large substantive item for the day. I know Martin's got something to add before Adam comes in, but just to say from the chair's point of view, this is the latest stage in our local plan update, which, as members will be know, it is built around our response to the climate emergency that presses upon us as a city, and it's a rather important piece of work, and I'm sure you'll all give it the due consideration it requires. So, Mr. Elliott, and then Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to do this under AOB, but given that some members may need to go early,
That's what I was thinking.
giving me,
Yes.
yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to do it now. It's just to alert members of panel that following considerations as part of the wider council budget saving and service reviews, there are a number of ELIs within the strategic planning service, which this panel should be made aware of. So we have Robin Coghlan, who's a team leader in policy and plans, and Lois Pickering, who will be very familiar to you for having led the core strategy selective review and the SAP. They're leaving, in actual fact, they left yesterday as part of early leavers. And we also have Mark Burgess, who is currently the group manager for the environment design group. He will be leaving at the end of the week. And Stephen Robson, who currently team leads landscape and the tree service, will also be leaving toward the end of the week. Now, we've put in place a proposed restructure, and there will be a commitment to fill some of those essential posts, but there will inevitably, I think, given the rather rapid departure of the early leavers, be a small period where we'll need to sort of refocus some of our work priorities. So just to make members aware that those key members of staff have now left the council, and we are working to replace that expertise and that resource elsewhere.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, it's come round rather soon, and it's not really the manner in which such excellent colleagues to leave, but it's very on brand for 2020, isn't it, really, that it's come around like this, and given that the issues we face as a council. But I'd just like to put on record for myself as chair and thank those colleagues for all their work over the years and their help and advice, and certainly educating myself in the ways of strategic planning. In fact, I spent yesterday making emails and calls to folk who are leaving, and it's kind of rather sort of bittersweet, really, I must admit. So I'm sure if any other member wants to add to that, that would be most welcome at this point. Councillor Caroline Gruen, Councillor Andrew Carter.
Sorry, I was just putting my clapping sign up actually to clap the colleagues that were leaving. I wasn't indicating to speak, but as you have called me, I would just like to add to your comments and say how much respect that I have acquired for those colleagues, how invaluable they have been to the process of planning and indeed my induction into it. And I am very grateful and wish them a very, very long and happy retirement.
Hear, hear. Councillor Carter, then Councillor Campbell.
Yes, can I echo those comments? I've worked with most of those officers in opposition or in control of the council. And I record my thanks for their professionalism, their briefings and advice over the years. And again, wish them a long and happy retirement, each and every one.
Excellent. Councillor Campbell.
Well, Chair, I'll add a note of agreement to that. I think the breadth of knowledge and understanding that of the planning system that they had will be very difficult for us to replace. And I, like the rest of us,
wish them all the best for the future and say a personal thank you and a thank you on behalf of Leeds for all the work they've done for the city.
Wonderful. Councillor Heron.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add my thanks and best wishes to all those colleagues that have left and are leaving this week. And just really to say that it's not been ideal circumstances. Clearly, we would have wanted to have had the opportunity to wish them farewell in person. We can't do that this year. And also, obviously, that's been brought forward rather more swiftly than any of us had anticipated as well. So hasn't really given us the opportunity perhaps to all say our thanks to them even electronically. So yeah, if we could as a panel, yeah, all just really add our support to the comments that you made at the outset. Thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Well, thanks, folks. Very, very heartfelt and very keenly met. Great. So, okay, local plan review. Adam.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to attempt to show a presentation here. So if you just bear with me for a minute, and I'll hopefully get that working for us. Okay, could you just let me know whether you can see that or not?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. I'll make a start then. So thank you, Chair. We're obviously keen to hear the views of members, so I intend to take the report as read. However, I've prepared a 10 to 15 minute presentation to help summarise the report and hopefully lead us into members' questions and comments. So in front of members is the latest paper on the local plan update, which seeks to build on previous panel sessions by putting forward a list of proposed topic areas and also potential policy approaches for consideration. As outlined in the report, the proposed topic areas will be covered across 2 sessions, with the topics of reducing emissions, heat networks, renewable energy and generation and storage, placemaking and green infrastructure, tree planting and retention, and biodiversity covered in today's session. A further session in January will cover the topics of infrastructure, flood risk, and patterns of growth. Subject to members' views as expressed to date is the aspiration of officers to bring together all the previous material to present a first consultation draft of the local plan update to that meeting in January. Addressing the climate emergency is one of the Leeds City Council's most important priorities, as reflected by the declaration of the emergency last year. Panel members have made clear their belief that the priority for the local plan update is to consolidate and move beyond existing local planning policies to address climate change through the establishment of new policies and guidance within the Leeds local plan, which helps address the climate emergency declaration to achieve net zero emissions by 2030. So I can just see that some participants are raising hands. I don't know if that reflects any problems with the presentation.
Folks, what I should have said at the start was I was proposing we take questions and comments at the end of Adam's presentation. Is that what this refers to, Colin and Barry?
Mine is about statutory consultation.
Well, let's do them at the end. Let's do them on block at the end. Okay, is that all right, Colin? Yeah, good.
I've forgotten to lower my hand. Sorry, Chair.
No worries, not at all. That's not a problem. But we'll do them at the end, members, because otherwise let's do them all at the end. I think it just be more sensible to do it like that. Carry on, Adam.
Okay. As set out in section 2.5 of the report, the first regulatory stage of the local plan update will be the Regulation 18 consultation. The purpose of this stage is to get views on what matters the local plan update will need to consider and address, otherwise known as the scope of the plan. As such, we intend to invite representations on what the plan should contain. Whilst not necessary for this stage of consultation, it is also considered helpful to both members, the public, specialist bodies, developers, and other consultation stakeholders if the preferred scope of the policies and initial detail on what they may contain was presented as part of the consultation. In no way are the initial preferred options presented in this report intended to prejudge the views of members or to prejudge the outcome of the Regulation 18 consultation, nor are the alternative options considered to be exhaustive. The preparation of the LPU, as with all development plan documents, is an iterative process which responds to evidence and views expressed through consultation. To that end, the report also contains some provisional questions that could be asked as part of the Regulation 18 consultation. Now, as we all know, Leeds City Council has declared a climate emergency and has set an ambition for Leeds to work towards carbon neutrality by 2030. This is a massive task, and to achieve our ambitions by 2030 and beyond, a rapid period of transition is required. The planning system has a critical role in mitigating and adapting to climate change. Specifically, it can shape places in ways that contribute to radical reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It can minimize vulnerability and improve resilience, encourage the more prudent use of existing resources, and support the move towards renewable and low carbon energy and associated infrastructure, as stressed within the National Planning Policy Framework. It is important to reflect that the Leeds Local Plan already contains a range of policies aimed at addressing climate change. We're not starting from scratch, and these are summarised at Appendix 1 of the report. But to move the agenda forward, it has been necessary to review the effectiveness of these policies and consider what new policies may be required to help achieve the Council's goals of net zero carbon by 2030. The Leeds Carbon Roadmap notes that there are a range of economically and technically viable innovative options that could help to close the gap between our current emission levels and carbon neutrality. So it's the role of the local plan update to explore how these options can be implemented through the planning system. Although it must be recognised that there will be many initiatives as part of this topic that will not be covered through the planning system. It will also be crucial to work with regional partners who have their own plans in development to ensure cross-boundary responses are aligned. In addition, this will form part of the Council's response to the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, which the Council has signed up to. It is also important to note that this work aligns with and builds on the work of the Climate Conversation, which began in 2019. This showed that many citizens in Leeds are concerned about climate change and believe that tackling it, becoming a carbon neutral city, and protecting wildlife diversity should be priorities for the Council. From paragraph 3.32 onwards of the report, this details potential policy approaches, which I'll now take members through in summary form. The first relates to reducing carbon emissions from buildings. As detailed in paragraph 3.36 of the report, whilst the current policy approaches within policies EN1 and EN2 of the core strategy do go significantly beyond national standards, they are not sufficiently stringent to contribute to our net zero aspirations. It is therefore proposed, as an initial preferred option, that the local plan update will contain a policy requiring all new development to be built to a zero carbon standard. The benefit of such an approach is obvious in carbon emission terms, but may also be beneficial that it allows developers to find their own way to zero carbon, rather than policies prescribing how exactly that should happen. This would allow for flexible responses from applicants. There are, of course, alternative options to this approach, which include an incremental tiered approach, which gets us to zero emissions from new buildings by 2030, but in the intervening years has perhaps less ambitious targets, or prescribed improvements over and above building regulations. We currently exceed these by 20%, but perhaps this could be increased in other ways. Another alternative would be requiring carbon offsetting by developments through increased renewable energy, given that the current target is set at 10%. And finally, requiring a set proportion of energy to be derived from low carbon renewable sources. And as I said at the top, they're set out as alternative options. They're not designed to be exhaustive options. And I would anticipate through consultation, it may be that other options emerge. Moving to sustainable construction. Sustainable construction goes beyond the emissions of a building when in use and operational, and instead, when considered holistically, can reflect the whole life sustainability of a building, from construction, use, and even to the demolition and recycling of building materials. However, the abolition of the Code for Sustainable Homes has meant that there are few standards set out within the existing local plan for residential development in terms of sustainable construction. Therefore, as an initial preferred option, it is considered that it may be beneficial to set a high standard for sustainable construction using a nationally recognised accreditation process. And members may be aware of things like Passive House or BREEAM and others are available on that. The other alternative options might be what's called a do-nothing approach, which doesn't set standards for construction, but instead relies upon the new policies for emissions to resolve some of those sustainability issues. And what that means is if we have a zero carbon approach in policy, then that will mean that almost inevitably developments will be more sustainable in terms of construction. But the downside of that approach is that it only really considers the operation of a building and doesn't necessarily consider its construction, or as I said, its recycling or demolition. The second option may be to require a high standard of sustainable construction for residential development, but to not require a specific rating system to be used. It's also worth updating members that since the time of writing the report, officers have met with sustainable construction experts at the University of Leeds, who have informed us of draft policy measures in Sweden, London and Manchester, whereby developments may be required to measure whole life carbon costs through the use of accredited European standards. We hope to pull together further work on this and we'll be able to update members on that in January. But that's an exciting kind of avenue that we are keen to explore. Renewable energy generation. As referenced in the report, let me just get a glass of water. Current targets for renewable energy generation as set out within the local plan have already been exceeded. As such, our approach to future renewable generation is considered a priority. As yet, work with partners has not revealed the scale of energy generation required. And clearly this would need to be in place before targets are put in place. Nevertheless, subject to that evidence and appropriate landscape assessments, it is considered preferable to establish new targets and to identify land for the delivery of new renewable energy generation. Of course, alternative options may include identifying suitable areas for renewable energy generation, but not setting targets. Another option would include having a criteria-based policy for new proposals and their consideration, but without identifying targets or allocating land for these purposes. Moving on to heat networks. The city's developing heat network is a sustainable method of transporting low carbon heat to residents and businesses. The policy, EN4 of the core strategy, is still considered fit for purpose. However, it is considered that it may benefit from supplementary guidance that better connects the network to potential customers. This guidance wouldn't form part of the local plan update per se, but would supplement it. Alternative options could be pursued, which either retain the existing policy suite, acknowledging the positive support they currently give to the network, or perhaps rewording the policies themselves to give a stronger focus for the need for new developments to plug into the heat network. Energy storage. This relates to the storage of excess electricity and potentially to hydrogen as well. And this excess electricity is generally created by renewable forms of energy generation, and it's an important part of the renewable energy generation infrastructure. As expressed in the report, there are currently no policies within the local plan on energy storage, and the preferred option proposed is for the formulation of a new criteria-based policy, which encourages energy storage in identified locations, usually typified as industrial areas with good connections to the electricity grid. This is a new policy area, and as such, we propose to not include targets for such uses, simply because at this stage, it's not clear of what the evidence to support targets would be. However, as an alternative approach, officers, of course, can pursue that option and at least investigate it further if members feel strongly that targets would be beneficial. Moving on from the sort of direct carbon emission topic areas, this report advocates a new approach to placemaking in order to align with existing council priorities. Now, members will know that well-designed places is already key to local planning in Leeds, as expressed through policy P10 of the core strategy. However, it is felt that existing policy could be strengthened. The vision for Leeds is to have a strong policy framework that ensures planning policy and decisions achieve healthy, inclusive, safe, resilient and adaptable places. That Leeds is designed to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all, reflecting the 17 interlinked sustainable development goals. The current policy lacks explicit reference to health and well-being or climate change, and more could be done to provide a stronger hook for placemaking, playable spaces, and signposting to other policies which have important linkages. It's therefore proposed that a new strategic policy puts placemaking at the heart of planning and design, with stronger hooks for stronger, healthier neighbourhoods, with ideas such as the 20-minute neighbourhood being at the heart of that. Green infrastructure. So green infrastructure and green space policies are placed across a variety of plans at the moment. As such, it is considered that green infrastructure policy would benefit from an enhanced policy framework which consolidates and clarifies its strategic direction. Our vision is to create new green infrastructure, including green space and the natural environment, through the planning process, and identify, improve, protect, and extend existing GI to address the challenges of climate change and create a healthy city. As such, a preferred option would be to redraft policies SB13 and G1 to strengthen existing designations, clarify areas that would benefit from increased provision, and clearly set out the role and function of GI in addressing the climate agenda. Moving on to tree planting and replacement, which I've merged into one slide. You'll see that they follow on from each other in the report itself. We know, trees are likely to play a crucial role in the council's response to the climate emergency. They have an enormous contribution to make in terms of carbon sequestration, but beyond their carbon benefits, they also have a huge impact on biodiversity and on health and well-being. Work through the White Rose Forest project is likely to identify the scale of tree planting required to reduce significant emissions. In addition, planning officers have considered the efficacy of existing policies to retain trees as part of development. It is currently considered that the current policy standards of a 3-for-1 replacement ratio does not necessarily reflect the carbon sequestration value of existing trees on sites. Therefore, moving forward, the preferred options advocated is for a policy approach which supports the work of the White Rose Forest and identifies new land for tree planting, whilst also proposing a more nuanced approach to tree replacement that is based on replacing the carbon sequestration value lost rather than a set number of trees. As ever, there are clearly alternatives to that approach, which are shown in the report, with more simplistic approaches of having set numbers of trees similar to the current approach, but perhaps more ambitious. Finally, in terms of the topic areas, the report considers the issue of biodiversity and biodiversity net gain in particular. As members may be aware, there is an environment bill currently before Parliament, which amongst many other things, seeks to establish biodiversity net gain targets for developments of at least 10%. It is not considered that significant alterations are required to existing policies as a result of the climate emergency agenda or the environment bill itself. However, existing policy G9 does require a net gain because existing policy G9 requires net gain itself, but it doesn't set a target. Therefore, the preferred option is to refine and enhance policy G9 to reflect the environment bill when enacted by setting out a system of biodiversity improvements, both on-site and off, with an approach to offsetting that maximises ecological opportunities within Leeds. An alternative approach could be to simply rely upon the existing provisions within the environment bill when enacted, with no local interpretation in place. So I just want to take members through the proposed next steps as well. So as I said at the start, the topics of infrastructure, flood risk and locations for growth will be presented at panel on the 19th of January. As part of this, officers have an aspiration to bring the consultation draft to that January panel with an aim to consult in the spring, subject to all the relevant approvals, of course. That's the end of the presentation. I'm obviously happy to take any questions. And I should say that there's a number of colleagues on the line who are kind of topic leads, which I'm happy to introduce now, Chair, if that's helpful, and will be available to answer questions as and when necessary.
Would help if the chair unmuted himself. Yeah, thanks, Adam. There's a lot to go out in that report. So what I propose to do, if we take Barry's question first, and then I've got some, and Andrew, and then I've got some points to make myself as chair, but there's obviously a lot to go at. So Councillor Anderson, do you want to come in?
Yeah, the one question I just want to ask at this stage is about consultation. I can't remember which development plans panel, but I mentioned the SCI. And I was given assurances that things are moving forward. But I have been approached by a number of the neighbourhood plan groups and also a number of local forum who are not at all happy at the speed of moving this? Is there any way we can bring our revised strategy to the January meeting so that we can approve our consultation? Because a lot of people fear that they are going to be excluded from making valued contributions rather than just answering questions, actually contributing to improving their areas, and not just taking the council's view and either agreeing or disagreeing, so that they want to be party to the discussions. So when can we bring forward the SCI? I'm suggesting it be brought forward at the same time in January. We can sign it off and we can then get the consultations on this part through the Regulation 18 done using the new standards that we're going to adopt.
Officers?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Anderson. I think the SCI is a really important point, and clearly the restrictions that we're currently under mean that we have to kind of reconsider, I think, how the SCI works. It wouldn't be currently possible for us to hold events, say in the way that we've held them previously. So, as Councillor Anderson will know, we've been looking at updating the SCI with work with community groups, but I think in the interim we perhaps need a more bespoke response to the current situation that we find ourselves in to enable us to go out to consultation in the spring. Obviously, we need to liaise with the executive member and chair, and obviously DPP on that, and we'll need to advance any interim SCI in advance of going out to consultation on any document. So happy to consider bringing that forward to DPP in January. I don't know if Martin had any further words on that.
Chair, if I may, just to clarify and hopefully put at ease for members that this is the start, the formal start of the process. So this is the Regulation 18 stage, which is around seeking views. So this is specifically what that stage is about. So we will be delighted to hear as many views across Leeds as we can, but it's important to give those consultees something to respond to and work with within the context that we're setting out. So there's definitely an opportunity there for more work and a two-way consultation, Councillor Anderson, and obviously learning as well from some of those neighbourhood groups who've already moved forward with specific parts of this agenda. I know that Garforth, for example, with their neighbourhood group, have got a real focus on food and health. So it's important to learn their lessons.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't want to exclude everybody, and yet at the same time we have to keep the process moving forward. So, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Barry's, as usual, stolen part of my initial comments, but I'm glad for the reassurance we've just had, because consultation on this must mean consultation, and not just, as Barry said, the answering of questions. People of Leeds need to have some real buy-in. A general point, really, and that is what position the council would be in, given that on zero carbon emission targets, there are 3 in operation, all of which affect the city. The city's target of 230, the WICA target, West Yorkshire Combined Authority, of which we are a member, of 2038, and the government's target of 2050. If we ultimately, through this process, put in restrictions on developers to obtain our targets in 2030, is that going to leave us open to either legal challenge or challenge through the planning inspectorate? And I raise that now because we all know how that our our friends, we call them friends for the moment, in the certain parts of the housing development industry, will be looking at every way possible of getting round some of these initiatives that we want to set, quite rightly, I might add. But I would like some reassurance on that, because I don't see a lot of point in getting ourselves into battles that we then can't win. So could I have some clarity on that, please?
Thanks, Andrew. I mean, just from my perspective, then I'll bring officers in, looking perhaps at Nicole for a comment regarding the legality of things. But I mean, we should be confident enough in our evidence base that leads us to 2030. As we've said before many times in this panel, we didn't pluck that out of the air for no reason. The 2030/2038 dates are interesting. I mean, a lot of the substantive policy and investment decisions you need to take for 2030 and 2038 are not hugely different in most respects. The 2050 date, I mean, members know my opinion on that. I think 2050 date is a nonsense date that has very little bearing in science or anything else. So, officers, do we want to comment on Councillor Carter's points he's raised?
Chair, if I come in,
Sure.
Others may want to supplement, but I think it's a really important point that's raised. But the key thing I think here to remember is that the development plan, the local development plan, has got primacy, and in terms of determining new development, it's a plan-led system. So if we evidence and we cement within these policies that there is the importance of the 2030 date, the 2030 date becomes our evidence for the heightened policies, if you like. And it then needn't play too big a part and too big a role in the day-to-day planning decisions that happen within the authority, because the policies are there and they're enacted now in order to meet that 2030 date. There will, of course, then be a need to work with the combined authority and with whatever proposals come out of government to meet the 2050 date, but they're likely to be at different strategic levels and apply not simply to development planning and the grant of planning permission. They'll have wider spatial implications and maybe have different impacts. So it's going to be important to ensure that we look across those different trajectories. But the main response to that is, provided that we do this through the plan, we should take great comfort in the 2030 days.
Sorry, Chair, can I come back very quickly?
I very much agree. Of course you can. Yeah. That's
all well and good, and I'm reassured to some degree. But wouldn't it be better? I want to focus really on the 2030-2038 situation, because the 2038 situation is the one that pertains through WICA, which will become the devolved mayoral authority. So it just seems to me that there's more likelihood of a clash there than with, and certainly Martin's comments bear that out, than there is with the government in 2050. I don't understand quite how we as a council, through our then membership on WICA, supported 2038 when our own target, which you've just said is well evidenced, is 2030. Surely we should be trying to harmonise the two.
Well, I mean, to say on WICA, Leeds is but one member of WICA. Now, I think on the 2038 date, I think there's work to be done there, moving forward and getting the mayoral authority when it comes about to our way of thinking, as it were. I think Councillor Ritchie and then Councillor Mulheron.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just want to go back to the Regulation 18 consultation. Yeah. I may be alone here, but I found the paper quite heavy going. There's a lot of detail in there, long paper and what have you. And I'm just concerned about how we're going to consult with those communities perhaps who haven't previously got involved with planning. Our colleague Councillor Brooks has raised this with us on a number of occasions for people in her ward. And, you know, we will get obviously those with organised neighbourhood groups and what have you, fully engaged in the process. But how can we make perhaps a simplified version so that we can engage with more people across the city? Thank you.
Very much agree. It's something we absolutely have to do. So Adam and Martin, do you want to come back on that, or do you want to hear a couple more members and then we'll come back on Matt?
I'm happy to come back on that, others only to say that I completely agree. And it is a challenge. There's, you know, as you say, Councillor Ritchie, there's quite a lot contained in that report, and some of it is, you know, as you say, I think fairly, that it can be heavy going. I think we've got to find a way to express this in a way that people can understand and engage with. And that can be tricky sometimes because the planning system forces us to think in a evidential basis, and we're almost always predicting that we're going to be in an examination in public. I think we need to perhaps reorientate ourselves to make sure that this consultation is about the public, it's about developers, it's about stakeholders, to make sure that everybody can get involved and not just directed at people who find these things easy to digest at the start.
Good. Okay then. David, did you want to come in specifically on that point?
Just to follow up quickly, Chair, it was just to say that I think there's a commitment within both the current and emerging SCI to make sure that material that is subject to consultation is presented in an accessible and plain English format. And I think what we need to try and do is move away from the technical language and make the information as accessible and as clear as practicable, but having the detail that sits behind it in terms of the evidential material that Adam has referred to. So it's been able to reach out to all audiences across the city in a very accessible manner. So that's the balance I think we need to achieve. Thank you, Chair.
That's fair enough. I agree. Councillor Caroline Grew and then Councillor Lisa Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually prompted to put my hand up on the basis of what Councillor Ritchie said. Firstly, to agree with it. But secondly, to say that as an ex-teacher of reading, we do challenge ourselves in planning, I have to say, and there are much simpler ways of saying what a lot of our papers say. And whilst I hear what Mr. Feeney has said about we need to come away from the technical language and express it in plain English, I haven't yet seen a planning document that successfully does that. I think your presentation, if I might say so, came towards it, and perhaps that might be the basis or the format for something that goes out. But I really do feel very strongly that when we're working with the public, we have to speak a language that everyone can understand. And planning documents are very, very difficult if you're not from a planning background. And I think it would almost be worth, I know we're very short of funds at the moment, but using a specialist to help us do that, because we haven't actually managed to pull that off yet, in my view. Thank you for raising it, Kevin. I think it was an important point.
I agree. We've got work to do. Councillor Mulheron.
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues have, as is inevitable at this point in the conversation, picked up some of the points I was going to make. I was going to reiterate your point that we've worked with the Leeds Climate Commission to develop an evidence-based scientific assessment of our climate reduction target, and that's why we like a roadmap for 2038. Expects substantial progress to be made across West Yorkshire by 2030, the date that we set. So clearly we would expect this city to be leading the way, because that's what we do. And in terms of the consultation with the public, I think the proposals we're looking to take out to consultation, I'd like to say, I think are the right ones. And I like the way that we're very clearly setting out our preferred approach in the paper that we've had today, and having some very clear kind of targets that we're aiming for. And then really the points that both Councillor Gruen and Councillor Ritchie have made in terms of jargon busting. because I think we could do a lot better in terms of making these discussions and these consultations much more accessible to the public. So I'd reiterate the points that they've made there and support them.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Yeah, I very much agree. I think officers have come back with a really strong, detailed piece of work, which is very much in alignment with what members have been talking about also, which is fantastic. In terms of sort of the individual topic areas, are there any particular, do any members want to bring up any particular points sort of across I'm not going to intend to go through them point by point, but with replacement EN1, EN2, that kind of thing, sustainable construction. Is anything people want to get in now that's specific? I think probably now is a good juncture. Now, a couple of hands went up and I saw Colin, then Barry, and then is Lisa's a new hand? Okay, well, let's do Colin, Barry, and Lisa. That's the order I saw them in. So, Colin.
Right, thanks, Chair. Can I initially say, actually, we need to be radical.
We do.
In everything we do, and the sort of initial preferred options seem to me quite radical. Maybe we could try and be a little more radical in certain areas. There are two areas, though, particular that I have.
Colin, can I just stop you 1 second? Hold that thought. Not interrupt you. Just had a message from George Hall saying that DPP is not streaming on YouTube. Tasha, there's a problem.
I'll just
so
check
something to look into. Colin, pick up exactly where you left off.
Right, there are a couple of areas when you talk about specifics.
Yeah.
One is the tree planting, and I think we've been, even with the current policy, we never come anywhere near a 3-for-1 replacement. And so whatever we do, we need to be both, as I say, radical, but we need to pick up what we've missed in the past. And I'm not sure how the mechanism for either, I suppose, calculating the carbon capture of a replacement works. So I'd probably like to see that explained. The other thing relates to green infrastructure, which again, we talk a lot about, but we're never very good at producing. And either I think, again, we have to set some really clear targets for development about how much usable green space they provide. And at the moment, we're not doing that. And I think that needs to be something that we need to look at closely in the future. Okay, Chair?
No, thanks. No, I agree. I mean, when I was sort of set of notes I've got scribbled for this meeting, one of them was touching on how do we calculate net carbon gain from the biodiversity aspects of any kind of policy, any kind of development when it comes to down to the coalface of granting permissions. How do we calculate that? So again, there's officers to go away, and I know it's in progress, Adam, but it's to keep looking at what mechanisms have been used around the piece about that. And you mentioned that in your presentation. So do you want to come back on that specific point, please, Adam?
Yeah, just to say that there are emerging technologies that are looking at things like that, working with the university, trying to understand how exactly it'll always be an estimate, but how much carbon is sequestered in a tree. And as I say, it won't be an exact science, but it does take us forward. Yeah. And I think we obviously need to explore that more. Hopefully, as when we go through consultation, we'll gather loads of data from people about how we can better do that.
Yeah, no, I think we'll be deluged of how to do this, I suspect, given the knowledge base that's in Leeds and its environment. Right, okay, that's covered. Councillor Anderson.
Got a number of points I want to make.
Sure.
The first one is on policy EN1, EN2. When we're at plans panels, the question we're always asking is how are we ensuring compliance? So I think doesn't necessarily have to be part of the policy document, but I do think we need to have a supplementary document that goes to support a number of these as to how we're going to measure compliance with it, so that there is, when it comes to plans panels, we can genuinely say they are or they are not complying with it. At the moment, we're relying on what might happen in the future, and then we're relying on enforcement, having this wonderful argument with a number of us about whether it's in the public interest to take action or not. And sometimes it can be well down the list. So that's as far as EN1 and EN2 are concerned. In respect of renewable energy generation and paragraph 3.47, during this lockdown, I've been attending a number of webinars on climate change as to how we can get it implemented in. And one of the things that came up today was that something called a three-partite system, which I didn't totally understand, if the truth be told, but this person was arguing that that should become standard in all new houses nowadays, because since we first talked about climate change, not just the council, this is nationally, there have been hundreds of thousands of houses built that are not in compliance with anybody's targets for anything, that because we've always put it off till tomorrow, we've always watered down as a country targets for these sort of things. And the other thing that was being suggested is we need to look at making photovoltaic cells on houses in certain areas and facing in certain directions. It should be standard. There should be no buts, maybes. That's the one way of getting it, and then storing a lot of that energy, because the person who was there from Friends of the Earth was talking about that now they've got their annual cost down to just over £100, their annual, because of being able to retain the energy and looking at things like that. So I think we need to look at that. In terms of heat networks, I think we need to be specific as to what we're going to do about both ground and air source heat pumps, and making it very, very clear as to what we're going to do. We also need to make sure that whatever policies we're designing just now can incorporate hydrogen literally at a flick of a switch. I know that might sound a mixed metaphor, but the fact is, I think people are now accepting that shortly we will be going over to hydrogen as the way forward in terms of things. So we need to make sure that's built in, because one of the problems I've noticed from sitting on plans panels is we've got the greatest of intention to do things, but we've not got the policies to back it up, because the world's moved on. And by the time we've now got our policies approved, some other things have happened. We also need to look at using how we're going to improve the heating and car refueling, because at the moment we insist that there needs to be EVF points at a house. But if you're moving over to hydrogen, I don't think anybody's suggesting that we fill the hydrogen up outside people's houses. So we need to make sure that our policies reflect what's going to happen as far as that's concerned, and also how we're going to heat the housing in terms of, at the moment, it looks as though gas is on its way out. Are we going to say that it should be hydrogen or should it be electricity? And also, when it comes to the more general policy on materials, etc., the other sister document, as to what role we see, if any, and Councillor Blackburn's not here to get upset about it, nuclear. How are we going to deal with that in terms of heating our houses? The next one is on tree planting, tree replacement. I do think we've got to be tougher on the number of trees that we're getting replaced, because we're losing too many trees. Now, we've got 3 for 1. There is a potential thought of 30. I don't know how achievable that would be, but is it possible to maybe go somewhere in the middle, round about 10, 15, 20, something like that? Have a better policy on that. And we also need to, I think, get a policy put in about if there has to be tree removal, how we can get innovative layouts to try and reincorporate trees back into the layouts of areas. Now, if there is time, and Councillor Collins doesn't come in. She did send me through her concerns, but I'll leave it in case she comes into the call and she can then express them herself. But she has a number of points she wants to make when she has sent them to me in advance.
Okay.
I'm not going to put them forward just now, but if you could remember to bring me back in again if she's not got into the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. As a lot to unpack. Yeah, just before officers come in, just members cast their mind back to when we started this process. We are aiming to have a set of policies that are as future-proof as we can possibly make them, and they stand up to the rigors of interrogation, as it were. And that includes things like photovoltaics being mandatory, hedgerows being mandatory, passive or nearest possible standards through materials, then technology, that kind of thing, Barry. So yeah, rest assured this document is a point along that journey to get to that point. So for example, I mean, if we'd have said 10 years ago that photovoltaics would generate electricity in pale ambient winter light, probably none of us would have thought that was the case, but they do. So, yeah. You know, and it's just, I mean, just to say, just as a general point, and possibly, hopefully, the developers might be watching this and might see this point. None of what we're asking for is sci-fi technology, right? Despite my love of Star Trek, this is not a Star Trekian paper and a process we're in, right? Nothing is unachievable right now. So, and cast your mind back to 2008 with the Sustainable Homes Code. It was all achievable then. We are effectively playing catch up since that was junked in 2011. So developers, this is when we're talking about the future of Leeds, and developers coming towards us with proposals. This when these come through to policy fruition, this is what they are going to have to do. And if they're not going to do it, then they're not going to get permission, because we'd be derelict in our duty if we didn't stick to this. So they are going to be incredibly strong, powerful policies when we come to the sign-off point post-consultations. So I want members to be really, really assured about that, because we'll ensure that they are like that as this panel. I'm sure we'll, because anyone watching will be able to detect a strong theme from this panel is the amount of consensus there are on these policy goals. So again, developers should be advised of that. So on that note, folks, officers, do you want to come in on councillors' points, which were very good?
Yes, I'll respond to those, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah.
A lot of good points there. First one that I picked up, Councillor Anderson, was about how we measure compliance, and I think that's it's a really good question. One of the issues that we currently have is obviously resolves around technical expertise as well, and we're growing and learning all the time on things like this, as the industry is as well. It's a bit of a journey that we're all on. The benefit of standards such as BREEAM or Passive House or any other recognised accredited schemes is that they're an independent verification of compliance. So if we can properly integrate those, we can get almost signed off that this met a certain standard, a tick. What we need to ensure is that that's the scheme that's built, and I think you referred to that in your question. Yes, okay, give him consent. What about what's actually built? And you're absolutely right. I think, as I referred to in the presentation, one of the conversations we'd had recently with the university about whole life carbon cycle, what we've seen is policies that propose that an assessment is done perhaps at pre-application for the sort of whole life carbon cost development, then perhaps at the application stage, but then almost as a condition, like a pre-commencement condition, that you will not be allowed to start development until we see evidence that the scheme meets the standards that you said that it met at an earlier stage. Now, that is in early stages of formulation. It's a draft policy in the London plan, and I think it's a draft policy in the Manchester plan as well.
Okay.
So we're at early stages with that. But I think that whole life carbon cycle approach, otherwise known as sort of embedded carbon, can be a way, as long as it's through accredited systems, there are lots, as I said, that can be a way that perhaps we can get better data and better certainty about what actually gets developed. In terms of renewable energy generation, you said that we need targets, I think. Clearly, we've had targets in the past, as I said, and we've successfully got targets found sound, and we've exceeded those targets, which I think is a good sign that we should have confidence moving forward that we can do this again. in a more ambitious way. In terms of whether things like photovoltaics should be standardized on houses in the right sort of aspect, clearly what we're talking about here is new developments. We can't really set policies for the retrofitting of old ones. That's going to be a different part of the equation, isn't it? In terms of new houses, though, I suppose it comes down to, as I said in the presentation, do we want to be prescriptive about things like that, or do we want to provide developers with a range of options about how they might meet zero carbon emissions, and for them to make those choices as suits their site, their proposal? I think that'll be an interesting one that comes out of consultation. I think we can certainly ask questions about that, because I think a lot of people want to see photovoltaics, as clearly members do. So that's certainly something we can tease out through consultation. Air and ground source heat pumps, I'll be honest, that's not an area of personal expertise. I'll try and answer the rest of the questions, then invite Helen Miller in if she's able to come in on that point. In terms of incorporating hydrogen, as I said, in terms of the energy storage aspects, I think we're probably fortunate that the kind of places that you would locate electrical storage or energy storage facilities would probably be the same places that you would find suitable for hydrogen as well. They're not in residential areas. They're not going to be next to schools or anything like that. They're going to be probably industrial areas, disused perhaps, but certainly with a really good connection to the grid. And I think whilst we don't have a hydrogen grid, do we, as yet, you're right that we need to be future-proof in that. It's emerging. How that works as a network, we still don't quite understand yet. But I think, as you say, let's try and make sure that the policies are future-proof for those kind of eventualities. Car refueling on hydrogen, it's perhaps a little bit too early to say what our approach to something like that should be. I agree with you, we probably shouldn't be encouraging hydrogen tanks at the front of people's houses, but I think the approach that we should be taking is probably one that we're going to have to develop. It may not necessarily be for this plan, perhaps it may be for future plans or supplementary guidance to this plan. In terms of heating homes, should that be electricity, nuclear options? I mean, it's not going to be within the planning remit to discuss nuclear. It's not going to be a part of the local plan update. I wouldn't have thought. Whether that's part of the National Grid's approach to electricity generation is obviously a matter for them. In terms of tree replacement, yeah, I welcome the point that we need to be tougher, and I think that's reflected in the report, hopefully in the presentation as well. 30 is an average figure really to reflect, as I say, a very heavy average figure to reflect the amount of carbon that we think is lost from a tree and replaced by saplings. So you'd essentially, to replace that amount of carbon, you'd be looking at probably 30 saplings. But I've seen a variety of different figures for that, all the way up to 100, to be frank. So I think 15 and 20 is a realistic figure. I think we have to probably think back to what it is we're trying to achieve. If this is about carbon sequestration, I think the technologies do exist for us to be able to understand that, as I said, for the work the university has done. But I think it may be that the development industry would feel that a more simplistic approach that ties to set numbers is far easier to implement and far easier for them to plan for. There might be merits in that. In terms of tree removal and how to get innovative layouts, I completely agree. And I think that relates very heavily to placemaking. I think the strengthening of placemaking and tying back to carbon emissions and health and well-being, as I said earlier, those links probably not sufficiently made, and they need to be. Helen, if I can bring you in terms of the discussion on air and ground source heat pumps, if you're able to contribute to that.
Yes, thanks, Adam. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yes.
We can, yes.
Okay, so in terms of air and ground source heat pumps, they do have a role for on-site development, and we would welcome proposals that come forward from developers to include air and ground source heat pumps I think their potential is most likely limited to on-site developments as opposed to large-scale renewable energy generation to the grid, the big kit, where there's probably less potential for air and ground source heat pumps to have a role for that. We're looking more at wind farm and solar farm energy. And there is a debate to be had about what potential there is for the district to contribute to large-scale renewable energy generation. And it's got pros and cons to it. And I think it's something we would want to put forward in the options paper for discussion to get an input from communities and developers and everybody who's interested in it. I think it's quite a crucial decision for Leeds as to how to go ahead with that.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. I agree.
Yeah.
We have to build that into the consultation process. Just on that, and if you want to come back on any of those points, Barry, I'll just bring you in a sec. But so, Adam, how do we get, and Councillor McKenna will smile wryly at this, but how do we get some sort of green engineering into buildings?
Chair.
Is there any way we can get more? Okay, I'm just going to say green walls built into things. Look, I know this looks like an obsession of mine, but they're good at scrubbing local air of pollutants, and they provide, carbon capture, oxygen reduction at a place where often there's not much of that going on. So how do we get that out of the consultation process to how best do that? Because at the moment, as Councillor McKenna to attest to, we experience some pushback from developers on this issue, and we'd like to get around that because we're seeing it around the world. There are so many proposals flying around for green engineering into buildings, and I'd want to see that us put out to the community leaders as to how we do that as best we can. That is affordable and effective and sensible. Anyway, I just wanted to leave that point in at this time.
Chair, if I could just come back on that. I mean, to me, that's about being really clear about what we're expecting from green space in development. Because at the moment, it seems to me that we expect an awful lot from green space. We expect it to serve a recreation and a play and an amenity and a carbon capture and an air quality and a biodiversity and an access role. So I think it's being really clear that actually just putting a bit of grass in a development doesn't automatically fulfill all of those objectives. It needs to be planned, it needs to be designed, it needs to be maintained, it needs to be connected, which is the importance of looking at green infrastructure and biodiversity and building design and placemaking as a whole. And I think with the green walls, it's going to be really important, especially in the sort of the more built up urban area where there is going to be a urban heat effect. Where in order to make sure that communities there are as resilient as possible, we're putting as much green infrastructure in. Now, if that can't be through on the ground green infrastructure, then that has to be through green walls and green roofs. So it's going to be an approach that's spatially distinctive and responsive to the opportunities to developers on particular sites in Leeds, as well as clarifying the purposes of green infrastructure, including green walls and roofs.
Okay, that's so it becomes linked to the resilience agenda as well as the overall green space. Okay, Mr. Feeney, do you want to come in at this point? Is that relevant to this? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to add to Martin's comment. I think in terms of the issues that Councillor Anderson has raised and observation that members are raising, I think that the key thrust of this is around the fabric first principles to make sure that the actual basic building design and fabric meet the environmental credentials that we're describing and want to push forward. Linked to that is ensuring that it's low carbon. So making sure that the very basic things are done in a way which is compatible with the agenda that we're describing. And then in moving that beyond, the issues around green engineering and green walls and green infrastructure, making sure that's integral to the building and that it's a solution to the issues that we are facing rather than an afterthought or some sort of retrospective adornment to a scheme. It's something that needs to be literally integrated as part of the ground up. And I think, as Martin has described, in terms of the urban heat island effect, not just in the city centre, but in major settlements, then it's about the resilience of those places and communities that live within them. So again, it's about it being integral to those places rather than something which is seen as an optional extra or some afterthought down the line. It's about it being integral to it. So I think it's about the presentation of how all of these policies work together as a package rather than being seen as sort of individual choices. It's about having a combination of solutions and options which suit places in those communities through these policies, but making sure that the policies are starting from the right point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I agree. Yeah. No, thanks, David. That's really helpful. A lot to get into this consultation then. Is that covered all your points, Barry? I think it probably has.
I think it did. Just to reiterate, when I was talking about ground source and air heat pumps, I was actually talking about it as individual houses, so that they have a sustainable source of energy. Because I'm not responsible for government policy, but I would have thought that they're going to have to end up taxing people who have got inefficient and ineffective ways, and providing the subsidy to those that have taken the time to actually put those measures in. So you need to find an incentive. So in other words, if we're building in a problem for residents, we shouldn't be doing that in the first place by having standard electricity, etc. That was the point I was trying to get across, but I'm happy with the responses I've had.
Yeah, it's a strong state for members. It's as future-proof as possible, really, isn't it? Insofar as much as one can anticipate these things. Okay, Councillor Gruen.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, actually, just Caroline, just before you come in, just want to put it on record, right, that Leeds City Council has no plans to build a nuclear power station. Just want to point that out.
I wasn't suggesting you were. I was just pointing out that there are alternatives. That's
no problem. Just after comments from your Pudsey colleagues the other week on the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee about building cannabis farms. Just want to state publicly the things we're not doing. I was being silly. Anyway, Councillor Caroline Gruen, please.
Thank you very much. My overall point really is how we are going to liaise with and win over developers. Because if you look at each of the preferred options in this paper, they are indeed my preferred option. So for the first example, require all development to be built to a zero carbon standard with net zero emissions. Of course, that's my preferred option. And if I was a member of the public who was not as familiar with the issues in this paper, that would be my preferred option. How achievable is that? And how on earth are we going to get into dialogue with developers on all of those options? Because they're all fabulous options. And it's rather ironic. And I couldn't help smiling, Martin, when you were talking about the green space and the fact that it needs to be designed to be multifunctional and serve a number of different functions, including those around climate change. And it's coming from officers that populate this particular panel. I don't know how many times I've heard Councillor Campbell push on in plans panel when we're looking at a development to say they've put the green space on a little tiny bit that they can't put houses on, and it's shoved into a corner. It's on a steep incline. It's got various things on it which obstruct play and any other activity, and possibly some dangerous water or flooding nearby. And that's why they're using it as green space, because they can't get houses on it. I've heard a line. I hope I'm not doing you an injustice, Colin, but I've heard you say that many occasions, and I've agreed with it. How are we going to get these ideas through? How are we going to win developers over? I mean, even that initial meeting that we did have, which was very interesting, we were nowhere near this level of commitment with developers. So, but to me, this is the weakness of this consultation. We absolutely need some on the inside with us, helping us develop these and being committed to them and providing examples.
Thanks, Councillor Gruen. It's a really good point. We previously discussed both here and on SEAC, which just remind you is the Climate Advisory Committee that I chair, about the need to take forward the Developers Forum we had started. and then 2020 rather got in the way. That we need to take forward. Let's be clear though, developers are a real mixed bag, aren't they? There are some developers, we've got some excellent ones in Leeds, people like Situ and CEG who get this and understand this and want to move forward with this agenda. And there are others we know full well that are going to fight anything tooth and nail that could possibly take a penny away from them, from their profits, despite the risk that that would put themselves and everyone in Leeds and in the country and in the world too. And that's putting it pretty starkly, but that's what we're talking about really. As I said earlier, none of what we're asking is unachievable now, and everything that we're asking, let's be really clear, is achievable within the financial envelope that most developers operate under. We're not asking them to...
Can I just stop you there for a moment, Chair, and just repeat the question then? So is require all development to be built to a zero carbon standard with net zero emissions possible now within the developer's envelope? I'm asking for an officer response on that.
I mean, I would say yes, but folks, officers?
Chair, I think the answer is yes, and we are seeing that from particular developers. What we're not seeing that is from all developers. So there's a number of things to do here. One is to confirm through this placemaking agenda that a lot of these objectives that we're trying to achieve here can be achieved at the same time. So we've already talked about the multifunctional benefits of well laid out green space, and it's really just persuading developers that if we get those high quality multifunctional open spaces where we've got the correct sustainable urban drainage, which through bringing water can improve biodiversity and also address cooling and potentially even water source heat production with trees for biodiversity, which will then in turn satisfy biodiversity net gain policies. All of this stuff comes together in terms of creating good places, and I think fundamentally good places that people want to live in. And we go back to what we discussed at the last couple of plans panel meetings, which was the planning white paper, where the government have understood that the public are not happy with the quality of housing that they are receiving, and that there's a problem with the design of that. Now we said design should be treated in its widest sense to include a lot of what we're talking about here today. And I think that's where we need to go with these policies. Now, is it viable? Sorry, Councillor Grun, yeah.
So I won't interrupt you, Martin, sorry.
No, that's okay. But you're absolutely correct, Councillor Grun, and that the question is that viable? So we have evidence of some developers doing that and doing it well. We have evidence of other developers trying to do some of that within the volume house builders. But what we need to do is get everybody doing that all of the time. And that's where we need to advocate that.
Yep.
And I think that is a massive step. And to sit in a plans panel and not really have any tools or powers to make that happen is deeply frustrating. And I think it's that situation that we really do need to change.
Well, this is the process that changes it, and changes it radically, and will give plans panels and development control officers all the tools they need to make this real and to make our ambitions real. And if we don't reach that point at the end of this process, we'll have failed. So let's make sure we don't. Councillor Mulherin is taking an important call. So what I was going to suggest we do is any further policy comments from members?
Sorry.
Yeah, Adam, of course.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond to the points of Councillor Gruen, just to supplement something that Martin had said. Whilst the council is obviously being incredibly innovative with what we're proposing, we're not unique in trying to get some of these policies through. And Reading already have got adopted a zero carbon policy. Now, I don't think it's necessarily as ambitious perhaps as ours is, but or at least our thoughts around this whole topic might be. But for them to have got that adopted, they needed to demonstrate the viability of such an approach. We'll obviously need to go through that evidence, I think, for our own benefit. But it has been done, and that should give us some confidence that we can do something similar or even more ambitious if we can get the right information in place. So yeah, I just wanted to say that it has been done, and other authorities are trying to push this agenda as well.
Yeah, we are far from a lone voice. You're quite right, Adam. And also that, I mean, when you look at across the country writ large, that creates an energy and a momentum all of its own. The sector can see what's coming, see what's already happening, and as in Reading, as I mentioned, but across the country, that generates companies, developers to think about how they're going to meet this agenda, because they're going to have to meet it. It's not optional, and we're going to make sure it's not optional. And we should be confident enough that we can make the case both in Leeds and both nationally as part of our sort of lobbying of national government to get the best national policies that we need as well. So we can do that. I'm sure, absolutely confident we can do that. Is any further comments on the paper?
I've got some from Councillor Collins.
Of course, right. So, very. David, was yours more of a wrap-up comment on this?
I was just going to mention that Councillor Anderson said he had some Councillor Collins comments, but he beat me to it.
He did. I did have also have it written down, by the way. I'm not such a terrible chair. Barry, by all means, over to you.
The issues that she's making is the use of land in order to generate local food. She thinks there's a need to analyse the effectiveness of the farmland we've got at the moment. So in effect, there needs to be more protection of land for food production locally and nationally. So she would like that built in. I'm praising what she's saying. And she also thinks that there might be a mix-up in some people's minds when it comes to placemaking and providing habitat for wildlife. She feels that the two are not compatible, and Leeds needs to decide whether it's going to use green spaces as parks for people or as wildlife sanctuaries. Unfortunately, the domestic dog is the key reason why the two are mutually exclusive. What is meant by green infrastructure? Is it for people or wildlife? This needs to be made clearer. So basically, in her view, land usage should be for development, food plains, solar farms, wood farms, energy storage, agriculture and farming, wildlife, woodland creation, etc., etc. But she just wanted me to make sure that those points were made about land use. I think, although I don't sit on that, her subgroup, I think where she's coming from is the discussions that she has in the climate change biodiversity group and feeding in the comments that you've made. I think you're party to that. I think that's where she's coming from in terms of her concerns.
Okay. Officers on Councillor Collins' points?
Chair, if I may, I mean, I sit on the biodiversity and food meeting as well, and I'm perfectly happy to work through the progression of these policies with that group, because I think it is really important for that group to also help us get some local farming advocates to understand how land can be used. I mean, at the moment we have what's referred to as best and most versatile land categorization maps. So we'll just need to clarify that those are sufficiently up to date and relevant to the types of food crops and the manner in which those food crops are grown in a kind of a modern urban environment. And I take the point about the need for clarity around placemaking and green infrastructure, and we'll take that away and clarify that. I mean, but in short, I think placemaking must create habitats for wildlife, and green infrastructure must be for both people and wildlife. But I'll look to clarify that and evidence that more fully in future.
Okay, that'd be really helpful. Yeah, I think it does stem from the SEAC working group. I've just joined that working group myself, so we'll help that process through. Councillor Mulheron, do you want to? Your timing is impeccable. Do you want to come in with the points you want to make?
Thank you, Chair. It was a while ago. Apologies, I had to take an urgent call. It was a little while back. I was wanting to come back in terms of supporting the proposals about using the carbon sequestration value of trees to calculate the replacement of trees. It's very hard to kind of have a figure when you're looking at very different subjects. So the size of the tree, the type of the tree, really changes the value in terms of its carbon reduction. And I think there's been a lot of good work done, I think it's referred to in the report, by the United Bank of Carbon and work done up at the University of Leeds, which really demonstrates the differences that you get depending on the type and maturity of trees. So it's not really as simple as saying, 3 trees for everyone that needs to be replaced. So I just want to support that. But also really to echo, I think quite a while ago, Councillor Campbell made comments about needing to be ambitious and supporting then the statements in the report around ensuring we have zero carbon standards and sustainable construction of homes, and looking at that lifetime kind of value of the construction of buildings. And then just 2 things kind of really wanted to draw out, which I maybe think aren't as clearly set out in the report as they could be. In terms of place making, there's a very small reference to 20-minute neighbourhoods at 3.76. And I really think we need to look at that and draw that out in a bit more detail and be clear with people about what we're talking about there, particularly if we're going to get that public engagement that we want to see in terms of responses to this report. And also in terms of energy storage, again, I think the only area where I'd say, in my view, maybe not quite as clear as it could be, is in terms of energy storage. So in this country, we have periods of time where, for instance, solar power is more effective than others. And looking out at the sky today, it's less effective at a day like today. So the capacity to then store power when it's generated is really, really important. And I think that's something that we maybe could improve. I think is the only area I'd say I'd like to see maybe a little bit more work done. But in terms of placemaking, I think in the report it just needs to be drawn out more.
Great. No, I agree with that. Which Martin and Adam can build in. I don't think firstly, from my point, I don't think the sort of 15-20 minute neighbourhood idea is going to go away. I think this year, I think people have got a renewed taste for being local and having more things locally and spending a lot less time rather commuting. It's very instructive. Not that Twitter's the world or anything, folks, but there was a Times journalist that rather unwisely tried to write a story that's saying the commute was an essential part of people's character and who they are. The replies to her tweet that linked the article were quite instructive, how that a lot of people across the country really don't like commuting if at all possible. So I think it's going to inform a lot of our policy work, that, and I don't think it'll go away even post our current COVID unpleasantness. Right. Do any officers want to come back on that at all?
I think they were all very, very good points. I think certainly in terms of the 20-minute neighbourhood, we can certainly expand on that when we come back in January in terms of both the infrastructure parts and the kind of locations of growth parts as well. I think they have a big role to play there. And absolutely recognise that where the report needs to be perhaps more fleshed out, and we'll obviously reflect on that and make sure that that's improved for the next version.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for that. Right, I think we're coming to the end of proceedings, just about. Looking to officer colleagues, is there anything further we need to know? I mean, we've given you an awful lot of input this afternoon, which is excellent. Thank you very much, folks. Is there anything else we need to cover? Adam, Martin, Mr. Feeney?
No, Chair.
Cool.
I think for me, Chair, thank you. It's just to say, this is an important piece of work, and we are trying to look forward and future-proof the city and not be caught in a set of policy constructs at a point in time. So it's important that the policies have the reach, I think, that you've asked for, and that we provide that strategic context longer term. So I think it's a useful debate and some helpful comments we can take away and build into the further work. So thank you.
Excellent. Yes, you all the political cover you need to be as radical as you want. You've seen the consensus across the groups from this panel, and that'll be reflected going forward, I'm absolutely sure. On that basis, folks, I think we're done. Well, Thank you very much. Now, Tash, when are our next meeting dates? Because you know I won't have remembered them off the top of my head. So if you could come in and bail me out, that'd be really helpful.
We are still seeking to schedule another meeting in December, but it hasn't yet been confirmed due to different availabilities. But the meeting in January will be the 19th.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. On that basis, thanks very much, everybody. Meeting's now closed.